Theodora Vane Marsh arrived at her father's dinner table in the only gown she had left, a gray wool dress that had once belonged to a woman who died in it, purchased for sixpence from a rag picker on Aldgate Street, the hem still stiff where it had been let down twice by someone else's hands. She wore it without apology. She had learned, in the 18 months since she had signed away her inheritance to settle her late brother's debts, that apology was a luxury she could no longer afford. The dining room of Vane Marsh House smelled of beeswax and old ambition. Her father, Reginald, had polished everything that could be polished for this occasion. The silver candlesticks, the mahogany sideboard, his own reputation. He stood at the head of the table looking pleased with himself in a way that had always preceded disaster, and he did not remark upon her dress. He had learned, too, that remarking upon it only made her quieter, and a quiet Theodora was more difficult to manage than a defiant one. "Our guest will arrive within the half-hour," Reginald said, adjusting the placement of a fork with the concentration of a man who believed small corrections could substitute for large ones. "I expect you to be agreeable, Thea. He is a man of considerable standing." "I am always agreeable," Theodora said, which was not entirely true, and they both knew it. She pulled a loose thread from her sleeve and wound it around her index finger until the tip went white. "What is his name?" "Lord Dorian Sable. He holds the Sable estate in Northumberland and properties in 3 other counties. He has been in London for the autumn season, and he has expressed—" Her father paused, choosing his word with the care of a man handling something fragile, "an interest in our family." Theodora unwound the thread. She had noticed, over the past several months, that her father used the phrase "our family" when he meant his financial situation, the way some men say "the household" when they mean "my comfort." She did not say this, she said instead, "What sort of interest?" "The sort that requires a pleasant dinner," Reginald said, and that was all she was given. She had been observing things lately that her father did not observe. She had always been the noticing sort, the kind of woman who reads a room the way a cartographer reads terrain, marking the high ground and the soft places. Since the loss of her inheritance, the habit had sharpened into something closer to necessity. She noticed, for instance, that the second housemaid had begun leaving the east-facing windows open even on cold evenings, which was peculiar. She noticed that the wine her father had selected was not the Bordeaux he reserved for business associates, but the older Burgundy he brought out only when he was nervous. She noticed that he had not told her why Lord Sable had expressed interest in their family, which meant the reason was either embarrassing or complicated, and in her experience those two things were rarely distinct. The knock at the front door came at precisely 8 o'clock. Theodora heard the butler's measured footsteps, the brief exchange of low voices, and then the sound of someone entering the house with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have learned to take up no more space than they intend to. She was already standing when Lord Dorian Sable walked into the dining room, and she was therefore the first thing he saw. A woman in a dead woman's gray dress, with ink-stained fingers and an expression of careful assessment that she had not bothered to disguise. He was not what she had expected. She had assembled, in the half-hour since her father's announcement, a composite portrait of a man of considerable standing, florid, self-assured, probably fond of his own voice. Lord Sable was none of these things. He was tall in the way that certain old buildings are tall, not aggressively, but with a settled permanence that made the room feel differently proportioned. His hair was dark, his complexion pale to an unusual degree, and his eyes— this was the detail she catalogued first, because she always catalogued eyes first— were a deep, still amber, the color of resin around something preserved. He looked at her, and she had the unsettling sensation of being red. "Miss Vane Marsh," her father said, performing the introduction with the relief of a man handing off a responsibility. "Lord Sable, my daughter Theodora." "Miss Vane Marsh," Lord Sable said. His voice was unhurried. "Your father mentioned you collect botanical illustrations." Theodora blinked. She had not expected him to know this, and she had not expected it to be the first thing he said. "I did," she said. I sold the collection last year, most of it. Something moved across his face. Not pity, which she would have resented, but a kind of recognition. The Redoute Prince? The Redoute Prince, she confirmed, and found that she was watching him more carefully than she had intended to. Dinner proceeded with the surface smoothness of a formal occasion, concealing structural damage beneath. Her father talked about the estate, about London, about nothing that meant anything. Lord Sable listened with the quality of attention that Theodora associated with people who had learned that most conversations were excavations, that if you waited long enough, what mattered would surface on its own. She ate her soup and noticed three things: that Lord Sable did not eat his, that he had positioned himself so that the candlelight fell primarily on his hands rather than his face, and that when the second housemaid entered to refill the water glasses, she did so without looking at him directly, as though she had been instructed not to. 4 things. She noticed 4 things. She always noticed more than she counted. After dinner, her father excused himself with transparent implausibility, something about correspondence that could not wait, and left them alone in the drawing room with a fire that had been built too high for the season and a silence that settled between them like a third presence. "You have questions," Lord Sable said. "I have observations," Theodora said. "Questions come after." He turned from the fire to look at her, and she saw that the firelight did something strange to his eyes. Not the amber warming to orange as it should, but something closer to the light being absorbed and held. "What have you observed?" "You didn't eat," she said. "The east windows of this house have been left open for the past 3 weeks, which began approximately when my father first mentioned your name. And you know about my botanical prints, which means you have been asking about me specifically, not about our family in general." She paused. "I would like to know why." Lord Sable was quiet for a moment. A candle guttered in its socket. Somewhere in the house, a clock marked the quarter hour with a sound like a small, polite disagreement. "Your father has a debt," he said at last. "Not to me. To a man named Greaves, a solicitor who has been acquiring distressed properties in this district for the past decade. Your father borrowed against the house 18 months ago." Theodora did not move. "Around the time I settled my brother's debts," she said, and her voice was level, because she had learned to keep it level. "Yes," Lord Sable said. "I became aware of the situation because Greaves has been using my family name, falsely, to lend authority to his transactions. I have been tracing his activities for some time. Your father is not the only one he has caught." He paused. "I came tonight because I wanted to understand what happened to your inheritance before I acted against Greaves. I needed to know if you had been coerced." The drawing room felt very still. Theodora looked at the man across from her. At the composed face, the amber eyes, the hands folded with a patience that did not feel human, precisely, but felt genuine, and said, "I was not coerced. I chose to sell the collection. I chose to settle the debts. My brother was not able to do it himself." She stopped. "You came here to investigate me." "I came here," Lord Sable said carefully, "because I wanted to understand you. Those are different things." She decided, in that moment, that she did not entirely believe him. But she decided also that she wanted to know more, and that wanting to know more was, for her, a kind of trust. He called again 3 days later, which was not precisely surprising, and brought with him a copy of a Thornton botanical print. Not one of the ones she had sold, but a different one, a passion flower study she had always coveted and never owned. He left it with the butler without a card. She knew it was from him because no one else in London knew she had wanted it, and she had never told her father. She put it on the wall above her writing desk and did not thank him for it, because she had not decided yet whether to accept it, and accepting it and hanging it were, she told herself, 2 different things. She also began, quietly, to investigate Lord Dorian Sable. It was not difficult to begin. The difficulty was in what she found. His name appeared in property records going back 60 years, not unusual for a family estate, but the signatory in each decade was listed as Dorian Sable, Lord of Sable Park, without variation, without the generational notation that should have marked father from son, from grandson. She found his name in a letter published in the Proceedings of the Royal Geographical Society in 1831, describing an expedition to the Carpathian Highlands. The letter was written in the same hand as a document she had found in her father's study dated 1849, which bore Lord Sable's signature on a charitable deed. 18 years, the same hand, not similar, identical. She sat with this for 2 days before she said anything to anyone. On the third day, she went to her father's study and found, in the drawer he believed she did not know about, the correspondence between Reginald Vanemarsh and the solicitor Greaves. She read it standing up, because sitting down felt like settling in, and she was not ready to settle into what she was reading. Greaves had not merely lent money against the house, he had structured the debt so that it could not be repaid. The interest compounded on terms that would have been illegal in a straightforward transaction, but which her father had signed without reading carefully, because her father had never read anything carefully in his life. The debt was now 3 times its original value, and Greaves had attached a condition: the house and its contents, and whatever remained of the Vanemarsh name, would transfer to him within 6 months unless the full sum was settled. Her father had known this for 4 months and had said nothing. She replaced the letters precisely as she had found them and went upstairs to put on her coat, because she needed to walk, and because walking was the only way she knew to think without her thoughts crowding each other. She had gone 3 streets before she became aware that Lord Sable was walking beside her. "You were at the records office on Tuesday," he said. Not an accusation, a statement. "You were watching me," she said, which was also a statement. "I was in the area," he said, and she turned to look at him in the flat gray morning light and thought, "He is lying, and he knows I know it, and he is telling me anyway because he wants to see what I do with the information." "I found the Greaves correspondence," she said. "My father has 6 months." Lord Sable stopped walking. Around them, the street went about its business. A cart horse, a woman with a basket, 2 boys arguing about something small and urgent. "I know," he said. "I have been building a case against Greaves for 18 months. I have documentation of 11 similar transactions. I intended to bring it before the courts this spring." "Intended," she said. "The case requires a witness who was directly defrauded and is willing to testify. Your father is the most recent. His testimony would anchor the case." He paused. "But Greaves has also acquired leverage. He has in his possession certain documents that your brother signed before his death. Documents that, if made public, would damage your family's reputation considerably." Theodora stood in the November street and felt the cold work its way through her inadequate coat, which she had not replaced because replacing it had not seemed essential until this moment. "What sort of documents?" "Gambling debts, and a promissory note to a woman in Bath." He said this without inflection, which she appreciated. "Greaves has been holding them as insurance. If your father testifies, Greaves will release them." "My brother has been dead for 2 years," Theodora said. "His reputation is beyond harming." "Yours is not," Lord Sable said quietly. "You settled his debts. Your name is attached to every transaction. If Greaves releases the documents, the story becomes that you knew about the woman in Bath and concealed it, that you used the sale of your inheritance to pay off a scandal, not a debt." She looked at him steadily. "And you have known this since you came to dinner?" "Yes." "And you did not tell me." The pause was brief, but she counted it. "I was trying to determine the best approach before consulting me," she said, and the temperature of her voice had nothing to do with the November air. "You were managing the situation. You were deciding what I needed to know and when I needed to know it, and you dressed it up as protecting me." She turned and began walking again. "I have been managed by men my entire life, Lord Sable. My father managed me into poverty. My brother managed me into selling everything I owned. I do not require another manager, however well-intentioned." He did not follow her immediately. She had gone half a block before she heard his footsteps behind her, and when he caught up, he said nothing for a full 2 minutes, which was, she would later think, the most intelligent thing he had done since she met him. "You are right," he said at last. "I should have told you everything at dinner. I told myself I was waiting until I had more information, but the truth is that I was not accustomed to consulting anyone." She glanced at him sidelong. "How long have you been unaccustomed to it?" He met her gaze, and something in the amber of his eyes shifted. Not the theatrical darkening of a man constructing mystery, but the genuine, careful opening of something that had been closed for a very long time. "Rather longer than you would find comfortable to hear," he said. She had been adding things up for several days. She added them up again now, walking beside him in the gray morning, and arrived at a sum that should have been impossible and was instead somehow clarifying. "The records office," she said. "Your signature in 1831 and 1849. "Yes." "The Carpathian letter." "Yes." "You did not eat at dinner." "No." "The east windows," she said. "You needed them open." He was quiet. "I am not afraid of you," she said, which was true, and which surprised her less than it probably should have. "I am, however, extremely annoyed that you did not simply tell me." "Most people," Lord Sable said, "do not arrive at the conclusion you have just arrived at and respond with annoyance." "Most people," Theodora said, "have not had to develop the habit of finding out things for themselves." She stopped at the corner where their paths would diverge. "I want to see the documentation you have on Greaves, all of it, and I want to be part of deciding what to do with it, not consulted after the fact, part of the decision." He looked at her for a long moment in the thin morning light, and she had the impression of someone encountering a landscape they had studied on a map and finding it larger and more varied than the map had suggested. "Yes," he said. "All right." She went home and wrote 3 letters. One to her father's solicitor requesting a full accounting of the Greaves debt, one to the Proceedings of the Royal Geographical Society requesting a copy of the 1831 Carpathian letter, and one to Lord Sable requesting that he bring his documentation to Vanemarsh House the following afternoon. She signed all 3 in the same careful hand she used for everything, the one that did not shake. The meeting the following afternoon lasted 4 hours and covered 11 fraudulent transactions, 2 forged witnesses, and 1 very old vampire's meticulous record-keeping, which turned out to be extraordinary. Lord Sable had documents going back decades, not only records of Greaves's recent activities, but a pattern of similar conduct by Greaves's father and before him his grandfather, a dynasty of legal predation that had been operating in the shadow of respectable London for 80 years. Theodora spread the documents across the dining room table and moved through them with the systematic attention she had once given to botanical illustrations, noting the connections, marking the inconsistencies, finding the thread that ran through all of them. "Here," she said, pressing her finger to a deed transfer from 1847, "the witness signature. It's the same on 3 different transactions in 3 different years. The same person cannot have witnessed all 3. They are in different counties, and the dates are too close together. Greaves forged the witness." Lord Sable leaned over the table beside her. He smelled of old books and cold air, which she had catalogued on the first evening and filed away, and was now retrieving with a different kind of attention. "If the witness signature is forged, the deeds are invalid," he said. "Which means my father's debt is built on an invalid foundation," she said. "Greaves cannot enforce it." "He can still release the documents about your brother." "Yes," she said. "He can." She straightened up. "But I have been thinking about that. The documents prove that my brother had a gambling debt and an obligation to a woman in Bath. They prove that I settled those obligations after his death. The story Greaves wants to tell is that I concealed a scandal. The story I would tell, if he releases them, is that I paid my brother's debts because I loved him, and because it was the right thing to do, and that a man named Greaves has been attempting to use that loyalty as a weapon." She looked at Lord Sable steadily. "I am not afraid of my own story." He was quiet for a moment, and she noticed that when he was quiet he was very quiet, not the restless quiet of someone containing themselves, but the deep stillness of someone for whom stillness was natural. "He will still try," Lord Sable said. Let him try, Theodora said. She had not accounted for what Greaves would do when he discovered that Lord Sable was actively building a case against him. She should have. She had been thorough about everything else. The letter arrived 4 days later, addressed to her father but clearly intended for her. It was from Greaves's solicitor, a man named Pettifer, whose name she had seen on several of the fraudulent documents, and who was therefore, she noted, implicated himself, which meant he had nothing to lose. The letter informed Reginald Vanemarsh that in light of his failure to meet the terms of his debt, and in light of certain recent inquiries made by parties acting on his behalf, Greaves was accelerating the timeline for property transfer, not 6 months, 6 weeks. Her father came to her with the letter in his hand, and the look of a man who had been waiting for someone to tell him what to do for so long that the waiting had become his permanent posture. "Thea," he said, and that was all he said. She took the letter from him and read it twice. Then she went to write to Lord Sable and found that he was already at the door. "Pettifer sent a copy to my solicitor as well," he said, when the butler had shown him in. "Greaves knows I am involved. He is trying to force a settlement before we can bring the case to court." "Then we move faster," Theodora said. "Theodora." He stopped. It was the first time he had used her given name without the formality of her title, and they both noticed it. He continued, more carefully. "Greaves has also filed a complaint with the Society of Antiquaries against my family name. He is claiming that the Sable estate records contain fraudulent entries, that the signatures spanning multiple decades are evidence of document forgery. He intends to use it to discredit anything I submit to the courts." The room was very still. Theodora understood immediately what he was telling her, that Greaves had found the same anomaly she had found and was going to use it as a weapon. "He knows what you are," she said. "He suspects," Lord Sable said. "He has suspected for some time. It is why he has been careful to use my family name falsely, to create a record of association that would make anything I say about him look like self-interested retaliation." He sat down, which she had rarely seen him do, and the sitting had the quality of something giving way, not collapse, but the deliberate lowering of a weight too long carried. "If I testify, he releases the documents about your brother and files the complaint. My credibility is destroyed before I can establish it. The case falls apart. And if you don't testify," Theodora said slowly, "he keeps the fraudulent deeds and my father loses the house." "Yes." She sat down across from him. The fire had burned low. Outside, the evening was pressing against the windows with the particular insistence of November, and she thought of the east windows left open in this house for weeks, and of a man who had been managing a centuries-long existence with the same careful, solitary patience he brought to everything, and of how that patience must have felt, sometimes, like a very long kind of loneliness. "The forged witness signature," she said. "I found it. I am the one who identified it. I can testify to that independently. I do not need you to testify at all. My testimony establishes the forgery, which invalidates the deed, which removes Greaves's claim on the house. Your name does not need to appear in the proceedings." Lord Sable looked at her. "If you testify, he releases the documents about your brother." "I told you," she said. "I am not afraid of my own story." "Theodora." He leaned forward, and she noticed that his hands, folded on the table between them, were very still, not tense, but deliberately, consciously still, as though he was choosing to be careful with himself. "He will not only release the documents, he will argue that your testimony is motivated by a personal attachment to me, that you are acting in my interest, not in the interest of justice. He will use our association to discredit you." "Then we make our association impossible to use as a weapon," she said, and heard, as she said it, exactly what she was proposing. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It had the quality of something settling, of two people in a room arriving by separate routes at the same location. "That is not a reason to—" he began. "No," she agreed. It is not, and it is not why I am saying it. She looked at him directly, the way she looked at documents she was trying to understand, not looking past the surface, but into it. I am saying it because I have been adding things up since the evening you walked into this dining room, and the sum I keep arriving at is that I would like to know you better. That is a separate matter from Greaves. I am capable of holding two things at once. Lord Sable was quiet for a long time. The fire shifted. Somewhere in the house, a door closed softly. I am not easy to know, he said at last. I have been alone for a very long time, and I have arranged my life around being alone, and I am not entirely certain I remember how to do otherwise. I have been managing on my own for 2 years, Theodora said. I am not looking for someone to take over. I am looking for someone to manage alongside. She paused. I am also looking for someone who will tell me things without deciding first what I am able to hear. He looked at her, and she saw in his amber eyes, which had absorbed firelight all evening without reflecting it back, which held their color the way old amber holds its inclusions, suspended and permanent, something that was not quite relief and not quite wonder, but contained elements of both. I have not met anyone like you, he said, in a very considerable span of time. I imagine not, she said, and found that she was smiling, which was something she had not done in this room in a long while. The case against Greaves went before the courts in the second week of December. Theodora testified for 40 minutes, presenting the forged witness signature and the chain of documentation she had assembled with Lord Sable's records and her own analytical attention. Pettifer, she had learned from a clerk she had cultivated over the previous fortnight, had begun quietly distancing himself from Greaves the moment he understood the scope of the evidence. He did not testify against his employer, but he did not testify for him either, and his silence was its own kind of statement. Greaves released the documents about her brother on the morning of her testimony, precisely as promised. By afternoon, they had been reprinted in two of the less reputable papers. By evening, Theodora had given a brief, clear statement to the more reputable ones. Her brother had died with debts, she had settled them because it was the right thing to do, and she had nothing further to say on the matter. The story, deprived of the shame it required to sustain itself, did not survive the week. The deed transfer was ruled invalid. Reginald Vane Marsh retained his house. Greaves was referred to the Crown's solicitors for investigation of the 11 additional transactions, and Pettifer, recognizing the direction of the wind, provided the documentation that made that investigation considerably easier. Lord Sable's name did not appear in the proceedings. The complaint to the Society of Antiquaries was withdrawn when Greaves found himself with larger concerns. The anomalous signatures in the Sable estate records remained anomalous, noted by no one in any official capacity, which was how things of that nature generally persisted, not through concealment, but through the human tendency to prefer explanations that required the least adjustment. On the last evening of December, with the year turning over in the cold outside, and a fire built to a sensible height in the drawing-room of Vane Marsh House, Theodora sat across from Lord Sable with a cup of tea she was actually drinking, and the Thornton passionflower print on the wall above them, which she had decided, approximately 6 weeks ago, to accept. You are still annoyed with me, he said, about the beginning. Intermittently, she said. It passes. I want to do better, he said, and the simplicity of it, no qualification, no explanation, no careful management of her response, was the most direct thing she had heard from him, and she had come to understand that directness cost him something which made it worth more. I know you do, she said. I have been watching you practice. He looked at her with an expression she had catalogued recently and not yet fully classified, something between amusement and a kind of careful, unguarded warmth that appeared only when he had stopped remembering to be composed. I am not certain whether to be flattered or unsettled by how closely you observe things. Both, she suggested. I find they are not mutually exclusive. Outside, the bells of the nearby church began to ring in the new year. Not the grand peal of a cathedral, but the modest, persistent sound of a parish that had been marking time in this street for longer than most of its residents had been alive. Theodora set down her cup and looked at the man across from her. The unchanged face, the amber eyes, the hands that had signed the same name across decades. The careful stillness that she had come to read not as distance, but as the particular discipline of someone who had learned that the world required more from him than it gave back. She thought of what she had sacrificed: the botanical collection, the inheritance, the years of careful economy, the reputation briefly endangered and then recovered. She did not think of these things as losses anymore, precisely. They had been choices made by her for reasons she stood behind. What she had not expected was that they would lead here, to this room, this fire, this man who had walked into her father's dinner party and looked at her as though she were someone worth understanding. "The passion flower," she said, nodding toward the print. "You knew I wanted that one specifically." "I read your correspondence with the Botanical Society," he said. 3 years of letters. You mentioned it twice. She should perhaps have objected to the reading of her correspondence. She found on reflection that she did not. "That is either very attentive or very presumptuous," she said. "I believe it is both," he said. "I find they are not mutually exclusive." She laughed, not the polite laugh of a drawing room, but the real one, the one that came from somewhere lower and less managed, the one she had almost forgotten she possessed. And Lord Dorian Sable, who had been alive long enough to have heard a great many laughs and catalogued them with the same attention she gave to anomalous signatures and forged witnesses, reached across the small table between them and placed his hand over hers. Not a gesture of possession, but of arrival, the way a traveler sets down their bag when they have finally reached the place they were always trying to reach. She turned her hand over beneath his and held on, and the bells kept ringing outside, and the fire was exactly the right height, and the passion flower print caught the light above them in the way that things catch light when they have finally been placed where they belong.